people aren't prepared for that or aren't aware of that the US dollar or the pound isn't going to be generally used in 50 years' time from now.
Well, exactly. So let's take it back to when the euro came about.
Yeah.
And we lost the lira, we lost the cent, we lost
Exactly.
all of these currencies.
And people probably wouldn't have said that would have happened.
No, but can you remember how quickly that came into play? I can't off the top of my head, but
I remember that there was a while where they were running concurrently.
yeah,
Like you would able to be using the euro or a lira or etc. You know what I mean? There would always be that happened for quite a while as well. I remember.
yeah, but then off the back of that, like
it just kind of faded out once
6,
more
7,
and more
8
people.
years later.
Yeah.
Greece went bust.
Yeah, but that's through the fundamentals of the euro as well. The fundamentals of the euro are fundamentally flawed because the idea of a euro is very, very difficult to introduce. They have to print euros across 27 member states at the moment, if not more. And every single domestic economy can only be powered by the euro. You see, so like for instance, the Greece economy has different requirements in terms of how many euros they need to print, how many, all the rest of it, the inflation of the Greece economy, etc., demand, all the rest of it is completely different to Germany.
Exactly, but now let's move this onto a global dollar.
Yeah.
And now we've got 10 times more member states than we have in the EU.
Yeah.
To consider.
Yeah.
And what if a whole continent was to be affected as opposed to a single country like Greece or like Spain or?
Exactly. These are elements that catch people off guard. But they are real dangers in my eyes that you could be up against.
But then also on the flip side, I mean, not to name any countries specifically, but there are some tiny countries in the world,
yeah,
that could, by chance or purely by chance, could become very, very powerful if we had one dollar, one global dollar.
Well, I think that regardless of whatever would be next after the dollar, there will be early adopters that will benefit. You're seeing that, I think, at the moment with El Salvador. I could see that as essentially a current bet on that the US dollar is no longer going to be effective 10, 20 years from now. And by them adopting Bitcoin early, that's maybe a bet on where they think that could go. And if they're an early adopter to it, that's going to transform their economy if the value of their currency goes up massively, because essentially what they've done now is adopted that as legal tender, and over time will increase the country's holdings of Bitcoin. And I think they're seeing that as a way out of their current economic struggles.
On that basis, so we know that Bitcoin itself has a finite supply.
Yeah.
Whereas dollars or any currency in theory has an infinite supply.
Well, yeah, but that's never been the case, has it, historically? When you look at value of all previous global currencies, it only, once you got away from the Bretton Woods Agreement where the dollar was pegged to gold, so essentially all it ever was a transfer of gold. Instead of you having to barrow around a load of gold, you're now obviously able to use paper, but at any one time that's redeemable in gold. And once they dipped the gold standard, and that obviously happened with the UK's currency as well, in the pound and all different currencies across the world, we then got to the point that you can just print it for, and in terms of The only value now is the promise that they will pay you a dollar if you obviously, etc. So it's at the moment that's what a lot of people are seeing as a fundamental weakness in the fiat currency system, is that it only ever gets devalued. You can't ever retake back pounds and dollars.
No.
So, in terms, and if you ever did try to do that, it would crash the economy, because the entire fiat currency system is entirely just based upon printing more of it continuously.
But that's been the way for so long,
That's
rightly or
been the
wrongly.
way
I mean,
for like 60, 70
all,
years.
yeah, we're all trading IOUs between each other effectively.
Yeah.
And I 100% think that a cryptocurrency in the future will be the way forward, as you can see with I mean, I don't know if you want to get that chart back up about the global reserve currency.
Going back to the early 1450s, started off with Portugal being the reserve currency, best part of 80 years, Spain 110, 80 years for the Netherlands, 95 for France, going into the 1800s, and obviously coming a little bit more modern day, we're into Britain, but obviously then since World War II, it seems like, since obviously the outbreak there, you've then become into the world wars, then you're into the US is the global reserve currency. And that essentially all came about through the world wars, where they were bankrolling the Allied States, as it were. So then beyond that, then everybody then owed dollars to the US in the reparations of the war. That's the way that they've gained that superiority. But that's now what we're going here. We're 94 years on this. Obviously, I don't know how up to date that this chart is. But best part, the most the longest serving one by the looks of it is 110 years. So are we coming to the end of that year, and 105 years beyond that? At some stage, it's got a historical element that it will expire. So are we?
Well, it does appear that we're coming to the end of a cycle based on history, but is that not to say that we have grown as a society, especially since, well, over centuries? I'm
Well, so then would it just continue as it is at the moment?
Possibly, with a bit of stability. I think with everything being denominated in dollars, I mean, we're talking gold, we're talking oil, the global economies effectively.
Yeah.
I think it would be a humongous change.
It is a humongous change, but that's why I think that we need to be aware or prepared for it to happen. I think this is a huge chart to back up the element, because at some stage, the useful and the power of these currencies, of course, as a global reserve currency, it has to be useful, doesn't it? It has to be valuable enough to be useful.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it appears like it's run out of its usefulness.
Yeah. Will it get to that point where the dollar is getting too worthless to be usable, and simply could create a huge amount of inflation off the back of that? Because in terms of it, the problem's are only getting worse as you're getting further and further along. You look at let's look at I'll look at this. Let's see if it's on here. I'm sure there's something on here about, M2 money stock. This is a good chart. So, right, okay. So that's the money that is in the world. Okay. M2 money stock. You can get M1 money stock as well, which I think is, that gives you an indication how much money is printed in the world.
Oh, that's incredible.
Okay. So you're getting to a point, surely, where it is useless. Because, we're only going back a few years ago, and this shows you how much has been printed in 2020 through COVID to support the economy. Otherwise, the economy would have crashed. Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
And arguably, we've not seen a reaction off that. That's as you can see in that chart, we've not seen that.
but then, if you look at the velocity of money, okay, so the velocity of money is actually how much money that you're printing and how much effect does that money have. Okay.
Mm.
So the more you print, the less effect it will have. And that's essentially what we're seeing here. Look at this drop.
God, I didn't even see that on the chart because it's so far down.
That's what I mean. So you're like, yeah, you didn't even notice them.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This is what I mean. Like in terms of this is steadily
squint to see it.
So this is the problem, is since the way that now modern economics is based is on the basis of that if there's a problem in the stock world, if there's a problem in any economy, they just print more money to fill the gap.
Yeah.
It's all about liquidity, isn't it?
Put a plaster on it.
Yeah. So in terms of at some stage, you have to pay the debts. There's only, two ways that you could do that is obviously absolutely crush economies by the fact that you'd have to recall some of the money, etc., that has been printed, which would never happen.
No.
Economies wouldn't ever, you would be literally having people starve on the streets. Or you have to replace it with something and essentially eliminate all of those debts and that they never existed, which is entirely possible, in terms of there would be no effect of that other than that then everybody needs to pay for something in a different currency that everyone agrees is now the rule.
And in terms of that next step, then
what happens when this chart gets to zero?
Well, that's it. I think you can already see from the purchasing power chart that we had up a minute ago that it's.
And again, what happens when
it's flatlined? It's over already.
Exactly. And I think that these two charts here, the velocity of money and the money stock in the world, gives you a huge.
Okay, so let's put a prediction on it then, or maybe not a prediction, but if it was to be another global currency to take over, so based on it being a 100-year cycle, if there was to be another one, what do we think it might be? Or if it was to be a cryptocurrency, a completely new form of currency away from material money that we know and are used to, what cryptocurrency or another cryptocurrency could it be? Could it be, I don't know, an XRP? Could it be a Bitcoin? Could it be a Tezos or a Lumens?
So you'd look at the use case of each single one and which one is most. All that you can ever do is in terms of, we're still so early in cryptocurrency at the moment that there's more than enough space for something else to be created.
Mm-hmm.
But when you can only judge obviously what has been created and what is the most useful for what, for the purpose. XRP's use case is to be participating already within is to make the current system work better in terms of to make it cheaper and quicker. It's not to replace the current system. Sure. So they're just going to simply make transactions across the world instant and cheap. Instead of, maybe at the moment using Western Union to transfer your money, it takes however long and costs you a commission on it. You're going to pay peanuts and get it instantly. Makes sense for the current system, but that's only if the current system is in place. But then obviously that's, the XRP could be a transfer of value from one place to the other instantly, regardless of what it's transferring from and into. So
on that note, before we move on, do you not think maybe XRP might be useful in the next 100 years in a transition before we move into a different phase? or maybe not in the next 100 years, but maybe over in the interim in the next 5 to 10 years to help move into the next global reserve currency.
This goes into the elements of what would you value, what do you need money to be? And you need money in two elements, don't you? You need money to either, it needs to be a good store of value through both time and distance. So essentially gold is a difficult store of value. It's good throughout time. It's held its value since the first ounce of gold was discovered to now. It's generally worth the same amount. You could buy this, it's got the same purchasing power. You could buy the same amount with it. And also it hasn't changed chemically. An ounce of gold 100 years ago is the same as it is now, right?
And will always be.
And always will be. So that is a good store of value through time, but it's really difficult to move, you know, and expensive. You have to store it. You're not going to be carrying much bars of gold around to transfer and use, etc., etc. So it doesn't pass that test. But then that's something where you do have to have a finite resource of it. That's the element of gold. The reason why gold has been able to hold its value is because it is finite. And the reasons why fiat currencies have not been able to is because they're not finite, and you can just simply print more of them. So they become less and less rare. I think that's the crux of it. So that's why a lot of people, who knows if it is the right option, but a lot of people are pointing they're hedging their bets on Bitcoin or something similar to it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because from what we've spoke about here, the perfect currency for the job is not finite and it's not infinite as well. There's a middle ground here.
Is there a middle ground? And I do subscribe to the fact, is Bitcoin too finite?
Yeah.
And is it going to be a matter of that's going to show you the way, and that could well be, that will show you where it needs to be, but would be something that actually goes, you know what, if that's actually if that's what
Bitcoin
we need,
is the torch.
can we not create something that does do exactly that? I don't know enough about the questions around security, because of course the money needs to be secure. Bitcoin ledger is extremely secure, and the blockchain itself hasn't ever been hacked. I don't think. I think I've read that.
I think the issue in terms of security, and maybe with any cryptocurrencies, and it's the ultimate problem is that it's not yours. Do you know what I mean? So if you were to lose your password to your ledger or to your account that you're holding it in, it's gone.
Yeah, but is that not the same as like
if you lose your PIN code for your card at the bank, there's ways of getting it back.
Okay, but I mean, is there not ways that you can get? Well, I guess there isn't at the minute, is there?
No. Who'd you contact?
Satoshi. Get him on it's in a very, very good point, in terms of, you've read stories about the fact that people have lost their computer and lost hundreds of Bitcoins, and
that's it. There's a guy still looking in landfill right now.
Yeah, exactly. I've read about that. Still going strong. Sun or rain, he's digging.
Sweating over his final password attempt.
Yeah. So I mean, there is that is an issue. But would that not be solved by the fact that you could have
it is an issue, and it will be solved, but you got to think, at the minute we're hoping for something that's finite but not infinite, and we're also hoping for something that's decentralized but is owned to a certain extent.
Yeah. But then I think that a lot of those issues, as you say, can be solved, and brighter minds than you or I probably will solve them. But I think that there's a strong argument, the fact of just fundamentally the world is going digital and has been going digital for a very long time, and that's a train
It
that
has
is
to.
stopping.
It has to.
So it almost seems like the last thing that would go digital would be currencies, and it would then be a digital currency, and because at some point you're not going to need any.
No,
I'm almost in my everyday life not needing cash.
no, not anymore. Unless you need to go to the barber, you don't need to have any money. 100%.
Exactly. So it'll be I think that digital currencies, one way or the other, will be the roots. It's a question of whether or not what digital currency it would be, and how centralized is that. I don't think that realistically you're going to get a decentralized currency that is not controlled by anybody, etc., etc. I don't think that you're ever going to be allowed that. Personally, I don't think you're ever going to be allowed that. It'll always be controlled by your government, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But to some people, I say unfortunately, I think it's, in some ways a good thing, but there's lots of benefits to that. But I don't think you're ever going to have a decentralized currency that isn't controlled by anybody and is just, a rule to itself, that is entirely just, by market forces. So you could well be right. You're going to be looking at a new currency that is created for the purpose of.
I think what we've established is at the minute there's nothing out there that does a good enough job.
I think what we can kind of summarize from this conversation is the fact that two things: the current system is broken and breaking at the moment.
Yeah.
And can't put my finger on it of what there is at the moment to replace it ready-made. And the summary of that is that there are going to be some big market dislocations to come up. There'll be turmoil in markets at some stage when the US dollar is losing its value and people are openly discussing the fact that you need a new currency. So I think that would see, and it's not like we haven't seen huge market crashes already, and
no, exactly,
we'll see them again. So I don't think that would stop things. It is all, as you said before, it's all based on faith.